Synopsis: he was reincarnated as a demon with extraordinary talents and a long lifespan. Though born with living parents, he became an orphan and had to fend for himself, always cautious of both his own kind and humans. Still, it didn't bother him too much. At least when he was 3, he suddenly gained a system, though it turned out to be less useful than expected. Even so, it allowed him to travel back in time where he befriended Frieren. But soon, he realized that his friend had a strong prejudice against demons. Thankfully, the little sister from his tribe, Aura, whom he'd known since birth, had become quite successful. However, their relationship was a bit complicated. He used to boss her around as a child. That wasn't a major issue, though. He even met the strongest hero, but the hero died a little too early. As he moved between the human and demon worlds, he gradually realized that neither side could be trusted. There's no choice. I'll have to rely on myself. And so, he set a new goal for himself. Kill the current Demon King and become the new Demon King. Tentatively. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn in Frieren as Demon? Path to Demon King. Part 1. If you enjoy this type of content, please gently click the like button. Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Remember to check out the original story linked in the description. Without further ado, let's get into the legend of the Demon King. Reincarnation of the Demon Clan, candidate for the Demon King. Inside a dark and damp cave, the young child squatting in the corner stared at the bonfire in front of him, which made crackling sounds from time to time, but his eyes were filled with a feeling of hopelessness. If you were to ask what it feels like to be reincarnated as a beast, the current little boy, Ash, was probably feeling the same way, right? And in this strange world, there was also a terrifying race. They had no kinship relationship between parents and children, and were generally like wild beasts after birth. No, except for a very small number, wild beasts usually raised their cubs, but this race had no behavior of raising cubs at all. This growth pattern and social structure left them without much emotion and empathy, with only a few individuals showing mutual assistance and social tendencies. They did not survive by eating people, but they would kill from time to time. However, they had no motive for this, it was just a subconscious behavior. If they disliked their weaker fellows, they would ruthlessly ravage them. Their racial identity was so weak that their weak sociality was only maintained by the strongest individuals. They didn't hold hatred or disgust towards humans themselves, which made their reason for killing humans seem very strange, as if some god had created a murderous race. To human beings, this incredible race was undoubtedly the worst and most brutal race, and that was the demon race. What made the child even more unfortunate was that he was a demon, a rare hidden horn demon, meaning a demon without horns. Being born into this barbaric race with such a great disadvantage made him deeply understand from the moment he was born that weakness is the greatest original sin. If they encountered an adult demon who disliked them, they could be killed without much effort. Because of this, they needed to be self-reliant at only 3 years old. That's right, Ash, what are you thinking about? The pink-haired girl with 2 pairs of small horns on her forehead leaned against him, hugging her slender knees. She broke a twig in 2 and threw it into the fire. Noticing he was in a daze, she frowned. It should be your turn to cook today, right? Hurry up and get started. I'm not saying anything bad about you, Ash sighed, trying to better adapt to this world and not seem out of place. He reached out and pressed his hand on her head. Speaking seriously, Aura, you shouldn't call me by my name. You should call me brother, right? Brother? What is that? The little girl, Aura, stared at him with puzzled eyes. Exhausted, Ash was too lazy to argue. Ha! Never mind, hurry up and cook. No, it's your turn to cook. Stop talking nonsense. I'm stronger now, so you cook for me. Aura was silent for a moment, but eventually stood up and walked toward the bottles and jars beside the cave, as well as the half-wolf carcass meant for dinner. Muttering, she said, Ash said he'd take care of me. But in the end, I still have to work for him. Ash clearly heard Aura's words, but chose to pretend he hadn't. Instead, he silently closed his eyes to meditate and practice magic. That's right, magic. Thanks to the inherited memories of the demon clan, he understood written language from birth, and even the methods of practicing magic and his own name were ingrained in him like instincts. It is precisely because of this that the demons, who can speak and walk even without parents at birth, do not die in droves, although the mortality rate in childhood is still extremely high. But magic still needs to be learned anyway. It is the pride of the demons and the foundation of their survival. It is part of their genetic instinct. This gave Ash a deep-rooted enthusiasm for it, and he would unconsciously study magic whenever he had free time. Just like other demons would choose a project to study diligently, he also had his own goal, gravity magic. Even though he had spent 3 years as a child, eating raw meat and drinking blood like a primitive man, and these childhood memories were unbearable to recall. Now, he had no choice at all. At least today, he had managed to obtain a small fire source from a nearby forest, where a fire had accidentally broken out. So for the time being, he didn't have to eat raw meat. When night fell and all was silent, the two of them sat together at the entrance of the cave, leaning against each other. Before them stretched the boundless starry sky, and a spectacular meteor shower unfolded overhead. The stars streaked across the sky, leaving behind brilliant trails, so beautiful that Ash trembled. For the first time, he felt fortunate to have been born in the mountains. It's really beautiful. Is it beautiful? I don't quite understand. Aura, still wiping her hands with weeds, seemed less impressed than Ash. So you're still just a child. We're the same age, right? I meant mentally. How much do you eat? Can we change the subject? Ash sighed, not wanting to continue the conversation. But Aura looked at him seriously and said, That's great, Ash. Actually, I want to eat beef tomorrow. The bullhead meat I picked up last time was really delicious. Don't waste the wolf I found the day before yesterday. Besides, where do you expect me to find beef? I believe Ash will figure it out. Seeing Ash's lack of enthusiasm, Aura encouraged him instead. But her tone was so flat, so indifferent, that Ash couldn't muster any pride in it. Nodding tiredly, he said, Yes, I'll try my best. But for now, let me at least finish watching the shooting stars. That wolf is already starting to stink. And it tastes awful. Don't be picky about food. Ash is so long-winded. That's my line. While half-heartedly responding to Aura, Ash gazed at the increasingly dense meteors in the sky. He remembered hearing somewhere that making wishes on shooting stars was supposed to be very effective, so he unconsciously made a wish to the stars. When I grow up, I definitely don't want to watch shooting stars with Aura anymore. Just as he silently made this vow, a series of words suddenly appeared in his sight. Words he didn't recognize but somehow understood. The chosen candidate for the Demon King, Ash, accept the gift from the ancient demon god, become the king of the demons, sacrifice the world to become a new god, kill the goddess, and start a new reincarnation on this planet. This sudden message left Ash confused. According to his inherited memories, there should only be the legendary goddess of creation. When had a demon god appeared? And why did he sound like such a lunatic? Sacrificing the world? The strange words that suddenly appeared before his eyes made Ash's head buzz. He couldn't quite make sense of it all. There were so many suspicious elements, but from what he gathered about the so-called Demon King growth system, he realized that this system was quite different from what he had imagined. The demon god, it turned out, was merely a self-proclaimed title of a deceased great demon from the mythological era, someone who had been on the verge of ascending to godhood. He was said to be the strongest demon king of his time, The reason Ash was chosen seemed to be because of his unique emotional qualities. He had a level of sociality and a range of emotions that were extremely rare among demons, stronger even than those of the past demon kings. This is why the system seemed to have a high evaluation of his potential, though Ash couldn't help but wonder if it was a misjudgment. After all, the system wasn't as powerful as one might expect. It didn't grant any extraordinary abilities. The only notable feature was the ability to plunder the souls of 1,000 humans, or intelligent beings with souls of equivalent worth, allowing Ash to exchange them for miracles through the system. To be precise, these miracles were replications of those granted by the goddess, stolen by the demon god. This system, carrying the ability to release miracles, was created by the demon god by replicating and stripping magic from himself. The power of the miracle would depend entirely on how many souls Ash could offer. According to the system, if enough souls were collected, it could grant miracles on par with the real thing. This meant that each wish required a minimum of 1,000 souls, with no upper limit. All accumulated souls could be spent on a single wish. Though the conditions were harsh, the bright side was that demons had exceptionally long lifespans, and even if Ash had to spend his time working in a slaughterhouse, he could eventually gather enough souls to make a wish. The system was incredibly simple, offering only this single function. At first, Ash was thrilled, but the excitement quickly gave way to frustration as he returned to the harsh reality of his situation. After all, he was just a 3-year-old child. Where could he possibly find 1,000 souls to make a wish? 13 years after his reincarnation, by a lake in the forest. The cold wind swept across the water, creating ripples as it drained Ash's body heat. With his still young body, he dragged a beast that resembled a tiger, though the size of a small car, with one hand, while gripping Aura's horn with the other. Without even turning his head, he said, "Why don't you stop researching mental magic and focus on something more practical?" After I restricted this thing's movements, I was exhausted. "Honestly, you're not much help. Don't tell me what to do, Ash. My magic is my own choice. Just because we were born in the same cave doesn't give you the right to interfere. You're so cold, even with a warm-hearted brother like me," Ash replied, using his gravity magic to lighten the load of both Aura and the large beast. He couldn't help but shrug at her attitude. "If you call dragging me around like an object warm-hearted, then fine. But you can lie down next to me when I recover tomorrow." Aura, the pink-haired girl who looked utterly worn out and covered in dust, closed her eyes as she allowed Ash to pull her along by her horns, letting him drag her through the mud. She didn't hesitate to fire back a sharp retort. "By the way, can you get up later? Will dinner be ready on time?" "Why am I doing that again? Isn't this a fair and democratic arrangement? I'll drag you home and you cook." During the battle, I was the one who did most of the work. Don't be so petty between brothers and sisters. With the little energy he had left, he cut Aura off with a single sentence, causing the pink-haired lowly to click her tongue behind him. Although she was reluctant, she still lit a bonfire when they returned to the cave where they lived, the flames casting an orange glow on the stone walls. Ash sat cross-legged nearby, watching Aura's profile in the firelight, unconsciously scrutinizing her. Though she had a strange personality and was still just a lowly, she was surprisingly attractive, with a delicate face and 2 sets of devilish horns that made it easy to drag her around. The best part was that she was hardworking and capable. Even though she talked back, she was dependable in most things. The only flaw was probably, "It'd be nicer if you were more docile and sweet. What are you mumbling about?" Aura, stirring the pot, glanced over at him and grinned. "Thinking about something weird again? I'm wondering if I should find a chance to leave this forest, to go to a human city and start eating humans instead. No, I'm not interested in human flesh. Look at me." He pointed to his head. "A naked alien. If we hadn't grown up together, I would have thought you were a stupid human pretending to be a demon. Even your demon aura is so weak. If I didn't carefully check you from the outside, you'd be mistaken for a human and killed, wouldn't you? Although the topic wasn't exactly pleasant, Aura tilted her head, closed one eye, and smiled brightly. Think about it. How would it feel to eat someone exactly like you? How would you feel if I asked you to eat someone like me? That's true. It's better to just kill someone like you. Hello. Just kidding. After all, we've been together for so long. When I perfect my magic, I'll make you my slave. You'll handle everything for me. Cooking, cleaning, hunting. Oh, and by the way, I hate cold water at night. You can warm my toes with your hands and lick them clean. All right? Aura seemed to revel in the thought, laughing with excitement at the mental image. But Ash paid no mind to her arrogant words. He just lowered his head, placing one hand on his forehead, wondering how the child who grew up with him had turned into such an odd person. His reaction caused Aura to misinterpret his feelings again. What? Ash, are you so happy you're embarrassed to look at me? Looking at you just makes me angry. I'm worried I might accidentally kill you, and then who would cook for me? Aura blinked in confusion before grabbing his head, shaking it playfully and laughing happily. You're so shy. Ash, you're obviously very happy, right? Great, now he can't listen to reason at all. Is it his twisted childhood that warped his mind? Or is it just in the nature of demons? Or maybe it's my fault. No, it has nothing to do with me, it's definitely one of the first two. Ash couldn't figure out why Aura thought he was shy, all while enduring the unpleasant sensation of his head being shaken. He was seriously considering whether hitting her with a heavy object could fix whatever was wrong with her brain. The two, loving each other, spent time together, night after night, and before they knew it, they had become wandering children and unknowingly spent another year together. In the primeval forest at noon, sunlight poured down like a waterfall, penetrating the dense treetops and falling to the ground in patches of golden light. The air in the forest seemed to be slightly warmed by the sun, carrying the fragrance of grass and trees, the scent of moist earth, and also a strong smell of blood. More than a dozen wolf corpses were scattered throughout the jungle, with wooden spears piercing through their bodies, as if fired from siege crossbows. After using gravity magic combined with spears to clear out a large number of wild wolves that were immobilized by Aura's mind control from the treetops, Ash continued to use gravity to suppress the last wolf, at Aura's request. The only survivor, whose movements were restricted, had a fierce look in its eyes, and its silver fur gleamed in the sunlight. Though terrified of the two monsters, the wolf kept growling lowly in its throat despite being held down. However, before it could pose any further threat, Aura, whose magic had roughly taken form, conjured an exquisite small scale using magic. Now, let's see who's stronger, you or me. Aura pointed the scale at the wolf with great momentum. But just after speaking, she glanced at the boy next to him and added, Ash, if the scale tips towards me, kill the wolf immediately. As soon as she finished speaking, before Ash could respond, the balance quickly tilted toward the wolf. The once whimpering creature gradually stopped struggling and lay on the ground obediently, motionless. Before Ash could finish, Aura squatted beside him, staring at the wolf without raising her head, and said, Let it go, Ash. It's already my pet. I see. Did you succeed in your research on mind control magic? What does that scale do? Good question. Aura suddenly stood up, pointed the scale at him, and smiled mischievously. Ash, how about you try it yourself? That's more convenient than any explanation, isn't it? No, you just want to use me as an experiment, don't you? Ash instinctively took a few steps back, keeping a wary eye on both Aura and the wolf. Don't you always say you're my big brother? If that's the case, you should be willing to use your body to experience the essence of my life's work, right? It's okay, I'll take great care of you, no? Wait, it should be your turn to take care of me. Time for you to cook for me. Thinking back on all the times he'd broken the rules and always made her accommodate his needs, Aura became more and more excited, sensing a rare opportunity, feeling like a serf rising up to become master of their own destiny. However, what you're saying makes sense, but I refuse. As the pink-haired lowly approached step by step, Ash's expression shifted to a smile, and he suddenly raised his hand, taking the initiative. An abnormal surge of gravity shot through Aura's body, distorting her expression and causing the scale in her hand to drop. She nearly collapsed to her knees, but she forced a smile. The injured wolf beside her, as if receiving an unseen command, suddenly leapt toward Ash, attempting to knock him down. At that moment, Ash looked up. Boom! A shockwave spread from his position. The fallen leaves scattered in the air, and the wolf that had lunged at Ash flew back before reaching him. Even the pink-haired lowly, standing 3 meters away, was knocked to the ground by the force, staring at him in disbelief. Wow, what? This shouldn't happen. Isn't your magic only effective on a single target? Do you think I'm stupid enough to reveal all my secrets to my dearest sister? Ash, breathing a little heavily, grabbed her horns and lifted her up. Leaning slightly forward, he pressed his forehead against hers, a sneering smile forming on his face. Tell me, Aura, how should I punish you for your betrayal? What are you talking about, Ash? Aren't we a loving family? Yes, we are a loving family, Ash nodded gently, but then his expression grew cold. Which is why betrayal can't be easily forgiven, right? I just thought you were being too harsh on me, so I wanted a little revenge. It's just the playful and willful behavior of a cute little sister. Okay? Oh, what a cute little troublemaker. He shrugged indifferently, showing no further dissatisfaction. He simply grabbed Aura by the horns and started walking toward the cave where they lived. Without turning his head, he ordered her to tell the wolf to take its pack back with it. Aura, accustomed to this treatment, obediently complied but couldn't help muttering, "At least change the gravity. My pants will be worn out before we even get back. Don't worry, I'll find a way to get you new ones. But I'll still give your behind some attention on the way back to the cave. You just want to see me walking around naked in front of you, don't you? You're such a pervert. Ash, even though you call yourself my brother, it's fine. I've already figured out that demons only give birth to one child at a time. I'm just your brother." Ash dragged Aura along, his face expressionless, unmoved by her bizarre comment. Aura, tapping her chin thoughtfully with her slender white fingers, tilted her head in confusion. Even from a common-sense perspective, that statement sounds pretty weird, doesn't it? From a demon's perspective, there's nothing strange about it. No, actually, from a demon's perspective, you should have killed me by now, right? Which is why you should praise my generosity. While nonchalantly dealing with Aura on their way back to the cave, Ash couldn't help but glance repeatedly at the wolf dragging its dead companions by the teeth, rather than paying attention to the sister he was hauling along. Aura's cute and willful behavior no longer surprised him, but the wolf's alternating docility and occasional baring of its teeth felt off to Ash. Just as he was about to question it, the wolf suddenly lunged at him, knocking him to the ground from behind and sinking its teeth into his neck. Blood splattered everywhere, and Ash's face twisted in pain. "Hey, what are you doing? Stop it!" Aura cried out in panic, startled by the sudden attack. Her intention had only been to reverse the dynamic with Ash and make him care for her, not to kill him. But the wolf, like a beast that had broken free from its chains, ignored her commands, biting into Ash's neck with savage force. At the height of this tense moment, another shockwave of repulsive force suddenly surged through the air. The wolf, with blood and flesh hanging from its jaws, was flung over 2 meters high without resistance. Then, Ash, still bleeding, grabbed Aura, who was nearly swept away by the aftermath, and positioned her in front of him. With a sickening puff, he yanked her sharp horns and drove them directly into the wolf's belly, causing its blood and entrails to explode outward, splattering across Aura's face. The pink-haired lowly was instantly drenched in blood, her entire body soaked as the wolf's remains gushed over her. Aura's horns pierced through the wolf's soft abdomen, causing the wolf to whimper pitifully in pain. It also kept kicking and struggling, causing blood to splatter continuously. But after a while, the out-of-control wolf finally died completely. Aura, who was unable to raise her head with the wolf's corpse on her horns, stood in stunned silence for a long time before she sighed deeply, staring ahead with a depressed expression. "Are you being polite? What do you take me for? I want to ask you what you are doing?" Ash, feeling the blood flowing down his neck and all over his body, asked irritably, "Do you really want to be an orphan? If I were an ordinary human, I'd be dead right now, wouldn't I? You may not believe this, but it really wasn't me this time. I can see that, and I felt from the beginning that your control was slipping. Well, it does need some improvement. So, how about you handle it for me?" Aura said seriously, showing an unprecedented serious expression. "Don't worry, I won't really take control, and when my magic is perfect, I'll definitely repay you. Aura, brother." The two of them locked eyes, with a sense of sibling affection hanging between them. At that moment, the corners of Aura's mouth seemed like they were about to curl up into a smile. But, "Keep dreaming." Ash lightly slapped her face and pushed her gently. Unbalanced by the wolf corpse on her horns, Aura lost her balance and fell backward. "SK, still doesn't work? Just Ash. You're quite sharp." Aura, lying on her back, clicked her tongue in dissatisfaction, staring up at the treetops in deep thought. Whether she was thinking about how to improve her magic or how to deceive Ash remained unknown. But Ash also understood the drawbacks of being self-taught, something that was especially true for demons. His progress in exploring magic on his own had been slow, and the occasional mistake was to be expected. However, at the moment he wasn't focused on that. Instead, he squatted beside Aura, looking down at the girl who showed no sign of remorse. "Aura, don't you think there's something you need to tell me? I almost forgot. Ash, could you move this corpse off my head? My neck feels like it's about to snap." "That's not what I meant. A little blood on your neck won't kill you, so why worry about it? For us demons, we won't die from losing blood. We'll just get weaker." Aura smiled slyly, covering her mouth with her hands. In Ash's opinion, it was the kind of smile that begged for a punch. His eye twitched as he barely managed to hold back his temper. Aura, noticing that Ash was on the verge of exploding, quickly raised her hands in surrender. All right, don't get so mad. I know I messed up. I'll do better next time. And I'll even make you something nice to eat tonight. Okay? Is this really the sincerity of your apology? Doesn't your attitude seem a little off?" "Ash, think about it," Aura continued, reasoning with him. "When my magic is fully developed, we won't have to hunt for food anymore. You could just sit at home and wait for others to bring it to you. Doesn't that sound nice? Now, can you please help me get this thing off? My horns seem to be stuck in the bone, and I can't free myself." Aura rolled on the ground, trying to pull the wolf off his head, but her two horns were stuck in its ribs. She was forced to sit up with the wolf's body still on her horns, looking at Ash with an awkward but polite smile. He glanced at the blood-covered figure in front of him, hesitated for a moment, and then looked at the wolf corpse beside him. "Actually, you could just leave it like this. It'll save me some energy. Hey, isn't this a bit weird? I was just kidding, but now..." As Ash said this, he turned his hand, conjuring a fireball in his palm. He picked up a branch from the ground and heated it until it glowed red before handing it to Aura. "Help me stop the bleeding first." "Oh, I'm good at this. Leave it to me." Aura, who had been quite depressed, suddenly jumped up, the wolf's corpse still stuck on her head, and took the burning stick from Ash. She pressed it against his neck without hesitation. With a sharp sizzle of searing flesh, the smell of burning meat filled the air. Ash gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead, while Aura shouted excitedly, "This is great. Ash, are you shaking? I'm so excited my fingers are shaking." "You're excited, aren't you?" Ash cursed as Aura's strange enthusiasm became too much to bear. "I told you to study healing magic ages ago. Why didn't you do it? You waste all your time on mental research, and now every time we get hurt, we have to torture each other like this. Are you a masochist and a sadist? How could that be? I don't like pain. I just like seeing you tremble. This is really great. I don't want to study healing magic. Isn't this better? And what about when you're hurt?" "No way. No matter what, my answer is still no. Healing magic is too troublesome. You don't even want to study it yourself. You just want me to so you can bully me for the rest of my life. I'm not that stupid. Besides, isn't this way more fun?" Aura's voice, completely unashamed of her excitement, left Ash speechless. His lips twitched as he silently vowed to give her a proper spanking when they got back home. However, at this point, Ash had basically abandoned the idea of having Aura study healing magic. He couldn't do it himself, and it was obvious Aura had no desire to learn it either. Even if she got injured and had to cauterize the wound with a burning stick, she wouldn't change her research focus that easily. Fortunately, thanks to their demon physiology, they didn't have to worry about infections or diseases. The only real danger was the smell of blood attracting monsters or wild beasts. Even though they were demons, they couldn't communicate with monsters and might even be attacked by them, just as demons sometimes fought and killed each other. At the moment, though, Ash was overwhelmed by pain, while Aura's excitement only grew. Her heavy breathing filled the air, making him lament the wild and unpredictable nature of demons. At the same time, he couldn't believe that this bizarre situation was the result of his own teachings. After all, he'd once been an innocent child, as pure as a blank slate, or so he liked to think. Ash felt quite helpless about the current situation, where he was forced to rely on folk remedies to treat his injuries. Yet, he could only be thankful that demons had sturdy physiques and just bear with it for the time being. "Fortunately, I've been enduring this since I was young, so maybe I'll get used to it. Although I'm used to this sort of thing, it's still pretty annoying." As Ash sat by the river, washing the blood off his body, he felt frustrated with his current circumstances, even though he had come to accept the reality. In front of him, Aura, with her back to him, soaked in the water to wash away the blood. She shook her long pink hair freely and sighed. "Hey, Ash, can you stop saying such annoying things behind people's backs? I think my figure is actually pretty good. Don't you think? Stop spouting nonsense. Your figure. Well, it's hard for me to judge." Ash was still staring at the bloodstains in the water, but subconsciously raised his head to glance at the lowly performing a wet and seductive act nearby. She was only 14 years old and still quite small, but there were hints of growth, which made him wonder about how she would mature in the future. Though he'd watched her grow up, Ash now had the strong urge to kick her as she twisted her hips in the water, sending her to the bottom of the river to drink some water. But since he was always bullying and ordering her around, he figured he should treat her a bit better from time to time. With that thought, he turned his eyes away, deciding to stop paying attention to the irritating girl. Aura noticed his action and couldn't help but put a finger to her lips, tilting her head in thought. After a moment, a bright smile lit up her face. I get it. You're feeling shy, aren't you?" Yes, I'm shy. They say demons are cold and selfish. This one is definitely selfish, but why are her emotions so blatant? If I can take credit for anything, it should be her behavior, right? Because I've influenced her in ways most demons wouldn't. Ash rubbed his forehead, trying to think about anything else rather than teaching her a lesson. He felt so proud of himself, even crediting her changes to his education. But I really don't understand how I ended up teaching such an infuriating creature. Look, Ash, you always make harsh comments about me every now and then. Do you secretly hate me? How could that be? You're my favorite sister, Really? Then why don't you show any expression? Is this how you're supposed to talk to your lover? Aura walked out of the water and leaned in, observing Ash closely as he read with an expressionless face, clearly puzzled. Unfortunately, Ash had no intention of humoring her. He didn't even want to react to her odd lover comment. Instead, he washed his hands in the cold river, stood up, and headed back toward the bushes he had come from, without bothering to look back. Have you finished washing? If you have, let's go back. Otherwise, the meat will get taken by wild beasts or monsters. Geez, Ash, you're really boring. Show some respect to your brother. Idiot. I want to be respectful, but you don't show enough consideration and love for your sister. Besides, who calls their beloved sister a thing and an idiot? Actually, all humans do. Huh? Really? Aura looked genuinely surprised as she subconsciously followed him, deep in thought. Humans are so barbaric. Ash, you're a demon. Why would you learn from such barbaric people? What should I do? She actually believes that. Should I tell her the truth? Nah, this is too funny. I'll just leave it for now. Ash walked ahead, covering his face for a moment, deciding to drop the matter. Anyway, it's not that important. Better not to take it too seriously. If something goes wrong, I can figure out a solution later. Ash and his eccentric sister spent another year living peacefully together in the vast forest. Aura, though lacking in combat ability, with the help of Ash and their controlled beasts and monsters, managed to build a servant army of nearly 100 at an impressive snowballing speed. Over the years, the two of them, having already mapped out most of the forest, traveled through the dense jungle and soon arrived at a human village nestled near the mountains. There was almost no resistance. The controlled servants occupied the village with overwhelming force, practically without any bloodshed. Looking at the trembling villagers gathered in the center of the village, Aura proudly declared without any hesitation, "From today onwards, we are your masters, and starting today, you'll cook for us," Ash added, voicing his current biggest wish. This left Aura momentarily speechless. Ash, isn't that a little too idealistic? Shouldn't you be killing them as usual? What are you talking about? Isn't it better to have someone cook for us? Or do you want to do all the cooking yourself? Fine, I guess we should keep them. Even though they're barbaric humans, they still have some use. Although her instinct was to kill, the prospect of not having to do the work herself, and recalling how Ash had constantly ordered her around over the years, made her suppress her instinct quickly. When the villagers saw the demons leading a large group of beasts and monsters, about a dozen hunters tried to resist. But Ash simply raised his hand, creating a gravitational force that pinned them to the ground. The others quickly gave up any hope of fighting back. However, the conversation between Ash and Aura offered the villagers a glimmer of hope, and Ash stood up once more, speaking to them at the right moment. "Don't worry, everyone. We're good people. No, wait, we're good demons. Actually, anyway, we're not bad. By the way, how do humans in this world perceive demons?" Ash mused, watching the people below. Although his system allowed him to grow stronger through killing, the exact nature of its power was still puzzling. Moreover, if he went around slaughtering people carelessly, he'd probably be labeled a demon king. He wasn't fond of killing innocent people unnecessarily, so for now, he opted to develop gradually. It wasn't that the idea of violence was completely off the table, but he preferred to pace himself, knowing it was smarter to grow his power slowly rather than draw unwanted attention. The villagers were skeptical about Ash, the man who had suddenly appeared leading a large number of monsters and beasts to besiege the village. They found it hard to believe what he said, especially since he was mingling with demons and claimed to be a human of the demon clan. In terms of appearance, Ash looked completely human, without any of the characteristic horns of a demon, making it difficult to distinguish between the two. Unless you were a magician with a deep understanding of demons and could judge by their aura, it was practically impossible for ordinary humans to tell the difference. Ash noticed this as well and briefly thought it might have been more convenient to just say he was human. However, with Aura standing next to him, it seemed better to be honest from the start than risk exposing himself later and destroying any trust. So, he spread his hands and said with a sigh, "Don't judge a person by their appearance. I am actually a demon. However, we have no intention of killing anyone. So I hope you'll cooperate with us." "You mean cooperation?" came a voice from the crowd. An old man, presumably the village chief, stepped forward. "Yes," Ash replied. "As long as you take care of us, we'll protect you from monsters and wild beasts." How does that sound? For a village on the edge of the forest, it's a pretty good deal, right? Really? Is that all? The old man remained skeptical. "You'll find out soon enough. But of course, you're not allowed to leave here or go to other villages. Actions speak louder than words," Ash thought. So instead of explaining further, he forced the villagers into cooperating. The villagers, still trembling, led them to the best house in the village. Soon after, under the supervision of the monsters, food was served. On the table were cheese, bread, soup made with milk, roasted meat dripping with fat, and the sweet aroma of roasted chestnuts. The smell alone was enough to stir the appetites of Ash and Aura, who had lived like savages in the mountains. They exchanged a glance before silently agreeing to dive in, fighting for the food without hesitation, ignoring any prior sense of friendship or decorum. They didn't worry about being poisoned. From their knowledge, ordinary poisons didn't work on demons. Even if there were poisons that could, it was highly unlikely a village like this one possessed such a thing. After the meal, the delicious food swayed Aura's judgment entirely. She decided to trust Ash's plan and agreed to settle here with him. At first, the villagers lived in a state of constant panic. But with the assistance of monsters and wild beasts, the success rate of hunting expeditions soared, while the risk of injuries dropped dramatically. Just as Ash had said, they no longer had to fear external threats. The controlled monsters and beasts even helped with farming, significantly improving the villagers' productivity and allowing them to cultivate new fields. In the winter of the first year, for the first time, no one starved to death in this poor border village. This quickly shifted the villagers' mentality, and by the third year, they had built stone statues of Ash and Aura, honoring them as patron saints. However, to avoid being labeled as heretics, they silently removed Aura's horns from the statues. With the support of the villagers, Ash and Aura were able to focus on studying magic while enjoying delicious meals every day. By the end of the first year, they relaxed the strict rules they had initially imposed. The village chief and several villagers who had voluntarily accepted control were allowed to move freely and purchase goods outside the village. Aura had cast obedience magic on them, ensuring they couldn't betray her. In practice, however, the only command they had to follow was to commit suicide if they betrayed Ash and Aura. Unless they received additional orders, their daily activities remained exactly the same as before, with the exception that they couldn't disobey Aura's commands or act against them. For the average villager, the difference between a life of adequate food and shelter with some spiritual constraints versus the freedom to starve to death alongside their families wasn't much of a dilemma. They chose the former without hesitation. Despite the semblance of shackles, this life was an improvement over their previous one. In the Middle Ages, hunger and even starvation were common in poor border villages like theirs. The kingdom they were in was still at war with neighboring countries, and heavy taxes were a constant burden. Through this human village, Ash began to understand the structure of the world they lived in. They were in the southern countries, far from the northern continent where the demon's stronghold was located. Because of this distance, demons here were few and far between, and the threat they posed was minimal. This, however, led to constant wars between the southern nations. Each country sought to conquer the other, but no one could succeed, resulting in frequent, bitter conflicts. It was due to this war that two orphans, fleeing the violence, had ended up in this remote village. It was these two war orphans who provided Ash with valuable information about the outside world. No matter which world humans live in, they always seem to like killing each other. don't they? Ash, musing during his spare time while practicing magic, lamented the state of the world. But he quickly pushed these dreary philosophical thoughts aside. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the wheat fields surrounding the village. As the wind swept across the land, the wheat moved like waves in a golden ocean, rolling gently in the breeze. Everything around him was peaceful, remarkably so, considering they were in a border village in a war-torn land. The tranquility made him feel almost lazy. Lying down on the grass at the edge of the village, Ash leaned against a tree trunk, closed his eyes, and tried to take a nap. But before he could fully drift off, a hesitant, elderly voice interrupted his daze. "Master Ash, it's almost time for dinner, and Master Aura is still in her room. Today marks the third day. Shouldn't you check on her?" "It's fine," Ash replied. "A demon won't starve to death in just 3 days. She's probably focused on studying magic." He turned to see the elderly village chief standing nearby, his face filled with hesitation, as if there was something he wanted to say but couldn't quite express. Ash found the concern humans had for demons oddly amusing, but it wasn't entirely surprising. After all, they had reached a mutual understanding with the village. For now, neither side could afford to part from the other. The villagers had come to rely on them, especially on Aura. Ash's nonchalant response made it clear he wasn't concerned about Aura, leaving the old village chief bewildered. The chief stood there, unsure of what to say, but Ash paid little attention to the chief's confusion. He stood up and walked toward the village, not even glancing back. "Don't worry too much. That girl will come out if she's really hungry." "Is that so?" the chief asked, still uncertain. "Yeah, that's it," Ash replied with a shrug, offering no further explanation as he headed toward the room the villagers had built for him and Aura the previous year. Along the way, villagers greeted him warmly with smiles. Inside the house, food had already been placed on the dining table. The middle-aged woman responsible for cooking was just about to leave, but when she saw Ash, she smiled and nodded. "The weather's getting colder lately. Master Ash, Master Aura, you should enjoy it while it's hot." "Thanks," Ash responded with a slight nod. He sat at the table and began eating his meal in silence. He didn't bother calling Aura. After all, she would get irritated if disturbed. The meal was simple: rough bread, homemade cheese, freshly roasted meat, and fresh vegetables. It wasn't anything special, but it was a significant improvement from the savage life they'd lived in the past. Ash ate quietly, his face expressionless, but his eyes reflected a sense of contentment. He seemed satisfied with the current situation. However, as he enjoyed his peaceful meal, dusk quietly spread through the room, casting a sense of unease, like the calm before a storm. Outside, a gentle breeze began to blow, rustling the leaves, as if nature itself was whispering something ominous. Ash was well aware that problems would inevitably arise from the coexistence of humans and demons, but when those problems would manifest, no one could say. For now, he pushed those thoughts aside, choosing to immerse himself in the quiet, enjoying this brief moment of peace. But the problem he had been dreading arrived one late autumn afternoon. It wasn't quite what he had expected, though. That afternoon, the sunlight was soft and warm, carrying a slight chill in the air. The sky was a deep, brilliant blue, with a few white clouds drifting lazily by. In the distance, farmers were busy with the harvest, while nearby, cows and sheep grazed leisurely. Occasionally, the chirping of birds and insects filled the air. Everything was so peaceful that Ash couldn't resist lying down on a stack of wheat, basking in the sunlight, drifting into a nap. However, just as he was dozing off, he felt a sharp kick on his shoulder. When he opened his eyes, he saw Aura standing over him. Now 18, she hadn't changed much from her younger years. She frowned down at him, her expression serious. "Don't sleep. Something's wrong," she said. Ash groaned, still half asleep. "What do you mean?" "The demon wolf that was working with the hunter. It's been killed. Yeah, Ash replied, still processing the information. He sat up from the ground, unsure whether the cause of the disturbance was human, monster, or the work of demons. The wind, carrying the scent of wheat and flowers, also seemed to bear the faint smell of blood. His ears quickly picked up the distant sound of horse hooves and panicked shouts, prompting him to stand and face the direction of the commotion. Not far away, a group of cavalrymen, their weapons stained with blood, galloped in from a field. Judging by their flag, they were soldiers of the kingdom of Telton, enemies of the kingdom of Tad, where they now stood. The cavalry, fully armed, had been patrolling the borders in a guerrilla manner, defending against wild beasts from the surrounding forests. Now, however, they had launched a surprise attack. On the spear of the lead cavalryman was the familiar body of Julius, a young hunter and war orphan who, like many, had fled here to escape the ravages of war. He had only recently begun his journey as a hunter. You've always wanted to escape the war, yet even now you cannot escape it. How pitiful. Ash narrowed his eyes slightly and let out a calm sigh. He took the sword that the village chief handed him, the man's hands trembling as he did so. Unlike Ash, the village chief was visibly anxious and panicked. Master Ash, please, protect us, he pleaded desperately. I can only do my best, Ash replied quietly. In the brutal wars of the Middle Ages, there was essentially no bottom line. Of course, war in general rarely had one, but in this era, the lack of restraint was even more glaring. Victorious armies frequently indulged in rape, looting, and massacres. Massacring border villages created terror, disrupted the enemy's economy, and weakened their will to fight, making it a common tactic. Soldiers often found a disturbing kind of satisfaction in such acts. None of this was particularly surprising, but the presence of demons and other foreign creatures in the village made the situation more dramatic and unexpected. Why are there demons in this village? And why so many monsters? Muttered the officer leading the cavalry sweep, visibly displeased as he noticed the demons and wild beasts on the edge of the village, along with Aura standing right next to Ash. The magician beside him glanced at the magical presence of the man standing in the village. Sensing the faint magical energy, he smirked smugly. Don't worry, Lord Maynard. That demon and the magician next to him seem inexperienced. The monsters are nothing special, just average creatures for this area. We'll overwhelm them easily with numbers. Are the demons keeping humans captive, or are humans keeping the demons captive? The cavalry commander, known as Maynard, murmured absently. He didn't dwell on the matter for long. Swinging his sword down in a decisive gesture, he shouted, "Kill them all! Devour them!" Aura commanded coldly. Having experienced many battles in the forest, Aura showed no fear. Her voice was steady as she ordered her puppets into action. The cavalry's iron hooves trampled the fields, kicking up a cloud of dust as they charged. In response to Aura's command, the beasts near the village surged forward in a massive wave, rushing to meet the cavalry head-on. As the cavalry and beasts charged toward each other, chaos erupted among the villagers. Some scrambled to find weapons in a desperate attempt to help, while others fled in a panic. Aura, however, paid them no mind. Whether they won or lost, they wouldn't be able to stay here any longer. She simply watched the puppets lunging forward and frowned. Hey, Ash, why am I fighting humans to protect them? Normally, I'd just run away, right? Don't bother me, Aura. I'm thinking about that too. Ash had only wanted to live a peaceful life, yet here he was, caught up in a human war. The absurdity of the situation left him helpless, forcing him to hold his forehead and sigh. Life was full of unwanted surprises. Even though Aura had a point, he couldn't just walk away. After all, they had lived here for several years. As they spoke, the village filled with the sounds of battle, wails, screams, and war cries echoed in the air, mingling with the ever-present smell of blood. It was like a scene from a battlefield. Ash raised one hand silently, and in that instant, the air seemed to freeze. The blood that had been spraying through the air abruptly changed direction and fell in straight lines. The knights, who had been dominating the fight against the beasts with their sturdy, enchanted armor, suddenly found their horses collapsing beneath them in clouds of dust, unable to support the weight. Though the change in gravity's range was subtle, it had a surprising effect on the horses carrying heavily armored riders during their charge. The unarmored villagers seized the moment. With heavy steps, they rushed forward, wielding simple weapons, thrusting them into the gaps in the knights' armor. The smaller beasts, also affected, attacked the knights' helmets. In an instant, the air was filled with human screams. Compared to his men, however, Maynard, the captain of the elite cavalry who had infiltrated enemy territory, reacted swiftly. As his horse collapsed, he rolled and stabilized himself in a half-kneeling stance. Trembling, a villager charged at him with a hoe raised high. Maynard merely raised his hand and severed the hoe with a swift strike, then swung his sword backhandedly, effortlessly cutting the villager in half. He's really strong, but we still need to deal with him. Despite witnessing the death of an acquaintance, Ash remained unmoved. He simply grabbed the best sword available in the village and quickly advanced. Maynard noticed and took up a fighting stance, ready for close combat. He had donned armor even while on horseback to protect himself from potential arrows. The mage, now pinned by the pressure of Ash's magic, struggled to remove his helmet and undo his gauntlets. At that moment, Ash suddenly stopped, twisting his waist slightly to gather strength. He then canceled the magic and threw the sword. Propelled by a repulsive force, the sword flew faster than expected. Maynard instinctively raised his hand to block it but froze in place. The sword whirred as it spun past Maynard with a sharp whoosh, burying itself directly into the forehead of the military mage who had just removed his helmet. Blood spattered, and the mage looked up in blank confusion, not even comprehending how he had died, before collapsing with his head tilted back. Maynard turned around, dumbfounded, as his mask was instantly stained with his companion's blood. His face twisted in fury, veins bulging. "You bastard!" Ash, still calm, responded, "You're fighting me in armor, heavy armor that's extra thick. Which means I have the advantage this time." He pressed his hand forward, concentrating his magic to intensify the gravity around Maynard. Maynard's feet sank into the ground, and his body bent under the increasing pressure. He struggled to stay upright, forced to plant his sword into the earth to support himself and prevent a complete collapse. Ash, satisfied, nodded and reached for a thin, sharp armor-piercing cone from his waist. In this world, many soldiers wear heavy armor, so this tool is unexpectedly useful. I haven't had a chance to use it before, but today, it's exactly what I need. Don't worry, I'll end your life quickly. He gestured toward Maynard's exposed neck, preparing to strike. Ash was well practiced in the routine, using magic to suppress his opponent and then finishing them off with a decisive blow. But just as he was about to thrust the cone into Maynard's neck, his hand suddenly felt empty. The armor-piercing cone had been snatched away in an instant, and before Ash could even register what had happened, the cone was already driven into his own neck. The speed was beyond his comprehension, leaving him no time to react. Aura, watching from a distance, gasped in disbelief. Impossible. This man's not normal. Wearing heavy armor and under intense gravity, how can he move so fast? It was at that moment Ash, inexperienced in direct combat with skilled opponents, realized he'd been completely outmaneuvered. As a magician, Ash should have kept his distance. But unlike other demons, his battle experience was lacking. He often relied on tricks or weapons to win, much like how he'd managed to kill the military wizard earlier. Now, though, his throat was pierced, and he couldn't utter a sound. Blood bubbled from his mouth as he collapsed to the ground, the noise of his struggling breath like the hiss of broken machinery. Ash's eyes widened as he stared at Maynard, who casually retrieved his sword from the dirt. Through the helmet's slit, Maynard grinned maliciously and raised his sword high. "You thought you could trap me with such simple magic? You're too young and inexperienced to face me." The scene was unmistakably one of Ash's defeat, and even though he tried to rise, his body refused to obey. As a demon, he was still a child. He hadn't grown fully, nor had he developed enough to face such overwhelming danger. This was his first true brush with death, and it filled him with despair. But just as Maynard's sword began its downward arc to finish Ash off, a massive demon bull charged out of nowhere, crashing into Maynard with a thunderous bang. Caught completely off guard, Maynard was sent flying through the air, slamming into a nearby house with a forceful crash. Gaga! A low-level beast dares? Attack me! Maynard should have been able to counter the bull's charge, but the combined effects of his heavy armor and the gravity magic had left him vulnerable. Enraged, he struggled to his feet, ready to confront the charging beast once more. His hands outstretched, he prepared to seize the enormous creature, now barreling toward him again. At that exact moment, the magic binding Maynard suddenly vanished. He wasn't prepared for the sudden change in gravity, and the demon bull slammed into him again, this time knocking him straight into a stone wall. The impact created a massive hole, and Maynard's body disappeared into the debris, his fate unknown. Meanwhile, the battlefield, now free of Ash's gravity magic, became even more chaotic. The injured cavalryman, sensing an opportunity, fought desperately against the beasts and villagers who had risen up in rebellion. The air was filled with the sound of clashing weapons, feral growls, and desperate shouts. However, the violence didn't last long. Slowly, the battlefield began to quiet, and the village returned to a tense, eerie calm. Beneath a sky painted blood red by the setting sun, the battlefield was strewn with bodies. Despite Ash's earlier use of gravity magic, the beasts had been slaughtered the moment the magic vanished, and the young, strong villagers lay scattered across the ground. However, the elite light cavalry, who should have easily massacred the village, had been reduced to only 3 men in the blink of an eye. The remaining cavalrymen, covered in blood and clearly wounded, wore damaged armor. Their expressions were grim. "It's just a village? And it turned out like this?" Maynard, the captain of the elite cavalry, shook his head in disbelief. His eyes settled on the old, weak, and injured villagers, among them Aura, who looked troubled and clearly had no fight left in her. Gripping his sword, Maynard marched forward, fury in his voice. "You damned demons! Just die already!" Who? A faint breath, untimely yet easily overlooked in the chaos of the battlefield, echoed softly. Ash, whose neck had been pierced by an armor-piercing spike and should have been dead, stood up again, silently and without fanfare. The sun's fading light cast a long shadow behind him as he approached Maynard from behind, like a phantom waiting for the right moment. With a quick motion, Ash pulled the spike from his own neck, blood splattering in its wake. Without hesitation, and before Maynard could sense the danger, Ash drove the spike into the gap in the captain's armor at the neck. Gah! Maynard's eyes widened in shock as fear and despair finally washed over him. He couldn't even turn to face his killer. Blood gushed from his neck, and his strength left him, causing him to collapse to the ground. From behind him came a chilling whisper, as though it had risen from the depths of hell. "You still don't understand demons? Or me? This level of injury won't kill me." "Maynard?" gasped one of the remaining soldiers. "Captain?" the other cried out in disbelief. Ash, standing over Maynard's body, pressed his foot against the captain's shoulder, using the leverage to yank the spike out. Maynard's lifeless form slumped to the ground. "How dare you? You bastard!" The two remaining cavalrymen, filled with rage, raised their swords, ready to strike Ash down to avenge their fallen captain. But Ash merely glanced at them, raising his hand slightly. Once more, the abnormal gravity took hold of their bodies, and the two men, already exhausted, both physically and mentally, were forced to their knees, their heavy armor crushing them beneath the increased weight. Ash wasted no time. He repeated his previous actions, ignoring their desperate curses and pleas, driving the armor-piercing spike into the gaps in their armor, swiftly ending their lives. When it was done, the battlefield was quiet. Ash, now soaked in blood, sat on the back of one of the fallen cavalrymen, releasing a deep sigh. Why am I doing this in the midst of humanity's internal conflicts? Aura stepped forward from the crowd, crouching in front of him, her hands propping up her chin as she grinned mischievously. But this world is quite interesting, isn't it? Maybe. Ash didn't respond to her directly. Instead, he lowered his head, staring at his blood-covered hands, letting his thoughts drift far away from the battlefield. It was Ash's first time killing someone, yet for some reason, he didn't feel any fear or hesitation. Was it the demon instinct within him, or had the years of fighting and bloodshed numbed him to it? He couldn't quite understand what was happening to him. Although the village had won the battle, no one felt any joy. A deep sorrow hung over the entire place. Death had touched every household, and under the village chief's orders, the villagers gathered their courage to deal with the bodies scattered across the ground. They also prepared to sell the armor and weapons of the fallen cavalrymen in a few days. Ash stood watching the busy villagers, absent-mindedly touching the bandage wrapped around his neck. His thoughts drifted to when he should leave. Aura, who had been silently observing him with a mischievous smile, toyed with a scale in her hand and spoke slowly. "Tell me, if I use obedience magic on you right now, what do you think would happen?" "Your magic is far from perfect," Ash replied. "It still has many flaws. For example, the stronger will dominate the weaker, so the chances of you being controlled instead are high." "Are you sure I've used up all my magic power?" That's an issue, too," Aura admitted with an innocent smile, still shaking the scales. She sighed playfully. "Although my control has improved, it's a risky gamble for a young demon like me. Your magic has too many weaknesses. You should switch to something more reliable." Ash, pale from blood loss, shook his head, offering advice. "Thanks for your concern, but if we were to compare on a larger scale, it's impossible for us to lose if we're on the same level, so are you jealous?" "Think whatever you like," Ash muttered. Though the injury to his neck wasn't fatal, demons could survive such wounds unless decapitated. He still felt drained. He had no energy left to argue with Aura. Shakily, he stood up and began to walk toward the village, hoping to rest for a bit before deciding what to do next. Aura followed closely behind, skipping and chatting away, her endless chattering making Ash feel her usual annoyance had increased tenfold. After resting briefly in the village, Ash ignored the villagers' pleas for him to stay. He took some food, most of the village's cash, and the cavalry captain's sword, and left with the villagers waving reluctantly. Ash knew the deaths of the enemy cavalry would soon be discovered, and the village would likely attract unwanted attention. Staying there was no longer an option. Of course, taking most of the village's money might seem cruel, but the value of the remaining cavalry weapons and armor would provide the villagers with enough funds to rebuild their homes. However, half a year later, as Ash and Aura passed by the village again, this time with a new herd of animals, their curiosity led them to the outskirts. What they found was a scene far different from the prosperous recovery they had imagined. The morning sun did not penetrate the clouds to reach the earth. An atmosphere of horror always lingered over the village. Compared to its once prosperous past, the village now stood as a place filled with scattered tragedies. The air was heavy with the strong scent of blood, and the villagers lying lifeless on both sides of the road had died with their eyes wide open in shock. There were no signs of pain on their faces, suggesting they had been killed instantly. The only traces left were the corpses of civilians and long-dried blood on the ground. Judging by the methods used, it was the demons, Aura concluded after a brief observation of the scene. No one had been spared, whether children or adults. This was typical of the demon's style, ruthless, cruel, and thorough, where lives were mercilessly ravaged and trampled upon. Ash stood in silence, staring at the two familiar stone statues in the center of the village, indescribable emotions flickering deep within his dark pupils. The village had been protected by demons and wasn't destroyed by humans. Even though more than half of the villagers had been killed or injured, the village had been trying to recover. However, it was soon completely destroyed by passing demons. Was this the village's fate? Or was there something more? How pitiful, Ash murmured as he crouched down, gently brushing the cold cheek of a young child with his fingertips. It would be great if the goddess you believe in really existed. Aura appeared confused. What are you doing? I just don't want to end up like this. I can only continue to work hard on my power. We need to think of some way. A way. The biggest difference between demons and humans in magic is the matter of inheritance. We don't have a teacher, so we have to figure everything out on our own, which is why we're still third-rate. Wouldn't it be better to find a teacher? Ash slowly stood up and turned toward the girl who always followed him. But Aura's response was to burst into laughter, almost falling backward. Just find a teacher? Ha ha. Ha ha ha. Ash, you're so funny. We're demons. How could anyone possibly teach us? Are you serious? Of course, the demons won't teach us, so we'll have to change our target. He ignored Aura's laughter and walked ahead without looking back. But for now, let's leave this place. Yes, yes, Aura wiped away her tears of laughter, her tone devoid of interest, and followed him out of the village. Before leaving, Ash set fire to the houses, letting the village, once his home, be engulfed by flames. He then turned away and left. But before they had walked too far, Aura nudged his stomach with her elbow, looking annoyed. By the way, where are we going next? I heard there's a demon king in the north. Want to go hang out there? I've been thinking about that too. So what's the plan? I'm still thinking. And how's that going? You're getting on my nerves. Can you tone it down a bit? No, I'm fine. Oh? Aura puffed out her chest in defiance. But before she could finish, Ash slapped her across the face, cutting off any further words. He pushed Aura aside, who was standing in his way, and walked ahead quickly, frowning as he worried about what to do next. If possible, he didn't want to keep wandering aimlessly. Maybe it would be better for him to join the Demon King? After leaving the village, Ash wondered if the surviving villagers had told anyone about the demons living there. But now that the demons had massacred the village, the area would become even more dangerous for them. This thought troubled him again and again. He glanced over at Aura, who sat not far away, sulking but already settled on the back of the magic bull. Though she didn't want to engage with him, she couldn't help but ask, noticing his gaze, "What's wrong? Have you figured it out yet? Let's go back first. We'll talk while we walk." Ash then mounted the back of the wolf, keeping some distance from Aura, as he continued to ponder their next move. Upon returning to the simple wooden house where they had been living, he sat on the rough wooden sofa, looking at the indifferent girl sitting across from him. He sighed deeply. After thinking it over, we really need to leave here. If we stay any longer, we might get surrounded and attacked. You better protect me well. It'd be a pain if I were to get in danger. That's exactly what I wanted to say, but is this really the right time for this discussion? He sighed again, shaking his head. Our bond is strong enough. Typical for siblings, I suppose. More importantly, where should we go after we leave? The north. That's where the Demon Clan's base is. So it's the north after all? Well, I don't mind. Since Ash had already made his decision, Aura didn't bother overthinking it. She simply stood up and began packing her things. Demons weren't known for procrastination when it came to survival. In fact, they could be even more diligent than others. Aura's behavior in this regard was no exception. So, with their minds made up, the two began packing together, preparing to cross the continent that day and head north toward the demon gathering place. It wasn't because they particularly liked other demons or felt any loyalty toward the Demon King. Demons were only loyal to themselves. For now, they just wanted to avoid being killed. Though demons frequently killed each other, and the weak were mercilessly trampled, they were sometimes ignored. That was preferable to the certainty of being hunted down by humans. Of course, humans weren't much better. They also killed each other and ruthlessly abused the weak. The difference was that demons operated by the law of the jungle, while humans were more structured socially. Though, the perverted ones found even more creative ways to exploit the weak. Maybe both demons and humans thought the other was abnormal, but at least neither Ash nor Aura had the energy to dwell on philosophical or sociological questions like that. Thanks to Ash's hornless nature, their journey north was unexpectedly smooth. The animals moved alone through the jungle. Ash sat up front, driving the carriage, while Aura hid inside, posing as a young lady. She was dressed like a Middle Eastern woman, her head wrapped tightly in cloth. "Ah, this is so boring. Ash, tell me a joke." Aura's complaint came from the carriage. Without missing a beat, Ash retorted, "Don't bother me. I'm reading a book." "A new book? What's so interesting about human history? You're so weird. I'd rather not end up like you." "Uneducated and clueless," he replied, occasionally flicking the horse's reins while keeping his eyes fixed on a book he'd recently bought in town, A History of the World. While Aura occasionally chatted with him, Ash had also discovered something noteworthy in the yellowed, nearly weathered book that had been given to him as a freebie. 500 years ago, humans could all learn magic. The great magician Flam had an even stronger master, someone considered the magician closest to the goddess, the great magician Siri. As he carefully flipped through the damaged pages, it felt as though he had uncovered a long-forgotten, extraordinary figure. He sighed softly. "It would be great if I could learn from someone like that." Flam's magic from 500 years ago was far beyond this era. Siri must have been even stronger, right? "Do you really think they'd teach demons?" Aura poked her head out from the carriage, resting her chin on his shoulder as she mercilessly doused his musings with cold reality. "I was just daydreaming. It's been 500 years. No one knows if Siri is even alive. And, by the way, your horn is pressing into my temple. It hurts. Maybe don't get so close next time." For now, Ash could only feel regret over the legendary magician, whose existence was summed up in just one sentence. If only he had someone to teach him. If he were the strongest magician in the world, maybe he wouldn't have had to hide in the mountains all this time. Perhaps the village's tragedy could have been avoided. These were the thoughts that would occasionally weigh on his mind after reading the book. But it was just a sigh of regret. Traveling through time was nothing more than a pipe dream. For a while, the two traveled at a leisurely pace, thinking together about where they might find a quiet place to continue their magic research. Early one morning, as the sun barely rose above the horizon, the air was cold and slightly damp. On a seemingly endless, desolate road with no sign of human habitation, their solitary carriage moved slowly. As they neared the border, they saw a group of heavily armed soldiers guarding the crossing not far ahead. "Because it's wartime, we're not allowed to leave the country freely?" Ash muttered, troubled. Aura's voice piped up from behind. "Why don't we just kill them?" "Don't be rash unless it's absolutely necessary. What if there are more troops nearby?" Fine, I'll do what you say," Aura grumbled but quickly dropped the idea. Ash climbed off the carriage, approaching the soldiers who surrounded them. He reached into his pocket, intending to bribe them to let them pass. But things didn't go as expected. Instead of taking the money and sending him on his way, as was usually the case, the soldiers wanted to conscript him, allowing the much younger Aura to leave. The situation could only be described in one word: conscription. During times of war, it was normal to drag people into labor or conscript them as soldiers. This made Ash understand why there was no one else on the road, because the local residents knew that soldiers were blocking the way and drafting men. What should I do? Should I get rid of them? Or should I follow them and look for a chance to escape? Should I leave peacefully? Ash worried for a while, but eventually shook his head slightly at Aura, who was watching him from a distance. He was taken away while Aura watched. At that moment, the two were forced to part ways. Although Aura was troubled for a while, she chose to take a detour, leaving the war-torn country and continuing north because it's Ash after all. There's no way he'll die so easily. With this thought in mind, Aura left without worry. However, due to the lack of Ash, she had no choice but to avoid human settlements and take a longer detour through the forest. As for Ash, whether it was fortunate or unfortunate, he was taken directly to a recruit camp and spared from becoming labor to build fortifications. When registering his information, Ash mentioned that he knew magic and gave a live demonstration. This successfully earned him a position as a battlefield mage, where he received what seemed to be pretty good treatment. In the military camp, most of the country's magic was made available to him, and Ash found that there no longer seemed to be a need for him to head north. He stayed in the military camp, studying magic all day long. Only 1 month passed this way, and Ash was given a saber and a robe, following the troops as they marched towards the enemy country. That night, the atmosphere in the Mage Corps was extremely tense, as many of them, like Ash, had been conscripted against their will and dragged into a war they didn't want to be part of. As mages, Ash and his 3 new companions received some special treatment. Even during the march, they didn't have to walk like the rest but were allowed to stay together in a carriage. Of course, this was more to save their energy so they could play a greater role on the battlefield, but I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. The young female mage sitting opposite Ash was curled up in the corner, her hands wrapped around her knees, her face full of despair as she repeated the same words over and over. Upon closer inspection, her body was trembling constantly. Next to Ash, the middle-aged woman sat absent-mindedly stroking a letter with her thumb. Ash knew her well enough to know that the letter was from her daughter. There was nothing strange about this. Most people on the battlefield clung to thoughts of their family or loved ones to help them survive this hell. It seemed that even in this world, it was no different. Sitting diagonally across from Ash, an old man with a long beard held a wooden statue of a goddess, praying quietly. However, Ash knew that this man wasn't actually a devout believer of the goddess of creation. He had never been religious. He was only praying now because he had no other option. Whether cramming in faith at the last minute would have any effect, the answer would soon be found on the battlefield. Compared to his teammates, Ash seemed the calmest. Though the war and hatred here didn't belong to him, he was merely a passerby. But now, no matter how reluctant he was, he had been pulled into this war. In the past, he had experienced small skirmishes in forests and villages, places where the strong preyed on the weak. That experience left him better prepared than the others around him, who had also been caught up in this conflict. Perhaps it was because of his calmness that he had been made the captain of the 4-person team in the carriage. Or maybe I should find a way to get out of this damn place, he muttered quietly, hiding the rest of his thoughts as he slightly lifted the curtain of the carriage. Outside, vast snow-covered plains stretched endlessly before his eyes. Distant forests dotted the horizon like emeralds against the white blanket of snow, contrasting with the softly glowing sky. During the boring march, time seemed to pass slowly, but the beautiful scenery outside the window still managed to capture Ash's attention. The air was crisp and filled with the fresh scent of ice and snow, though the rhythmic pounding of horses' hooves through the snow broke the tranquility of the scene. After some time, a small town emerged at the edge of the snowfield, its streets quiet and desolate. As the army approached, old houses and recruitment notices lined the streets, filling Ash's view and quickly making him lose interest. It's daytime now. We should reach the front line soon after dinner, he muttered to himself, closing his eyes. In the southern countries, snow was uncommon, but this place sat on a plateau, covered in ice and snow year-round. The two nations were fighting for control of this snowy region. Not far from the town, the scene shifted dramatically. In sharp contrast to the previous beauty, the armies lined up on both sides of the battlefield, prepared for conflict. However, the front line of the opposing army appeared disorganized, though the reason became obvious soon enough. A group of children, no older than 10 on average, stood at the front, boys and girls alike. Their eyes were lifeless, and they held long swords in their hands. Clearly, they were being used as cannon fodder and spiritual meat shields. Don't their parents object to this? Aren't they afraid of causing riots? Or are they all orphans? Ash muttered to himself. The middle-aged woman in his team, who had been sitting across from him earlier, had a complicated expression when she heard his words. They don't have parents. These are war orphans. Really? So we're the lucky ones? Almost. We still have some strength left, but who knows what will happen. Captain, if I die, could you take care of my child? I don't want my child to... Hold on. We've only known each other for a month, and you're already saying this? But right now, Captain, you seem the calmest, so... Am I the only one who can ask for your help? Ash nodded silently but sighed. Even if I survive this war, I won't stay here, so I can't accept your request. You're really going too far. At least you could have agreed, if only to comfort me. I don't like lying. You'll have to find a way to survive on your own. After that, he paid no more attention to the middle-aged woman, whose face had fallen with sadness. Instead, he focused on preparing for the impending battle, holding his breath as he readied himself. Soon after, the sound of war drums echoed across the wilderness, and the army began to move in an orderly formation, launching volleys of arrows at the enemy's cannon fodder. The wizards followed behind, waving their wands and brewing powerful spells. In the midst of this tense atmosphere, Ash blended into the group, symbolically fulfilling his role by hurling fireballs into the dense enemy lines. He had hoped to simply go through the motions, fishing in troubled waters, while looking for an opportunity to escape. But the situation was more serious than he had imagined. Just as the two armies clashed, a cavalry unit suddenly emerged from the flank, like a sharp sword cutting through the supporting troops. They charged forward, swords gleaming through the dust, heading straight for the magicians. Magicians of this era were generally slow in casting spells, and they particularly lacked ways to counter surprise attacks. This was why they had been issued sabers from the beginning. In an instant, screams rang out around Ash, and the nightmare of battle unfolded before him. The world turned red with blood as his former companions fell one by one. Yet, in the midst of this chaos, Ash's mastery of gravity magic allowed him to stand out. However, by the time the battle that lasted several hours came to an end, most of his teammates had perished. The only one left alive beside him was the middle-aged woman, who had clung to life with all her strength. She still knelt on the ground, barely breathing. You're really amazing. Can belief really increase someone's chance of survival? Ash muttered, looking at the woman whose throat had been slashed by a knight's sword, blood pouring from the wound as she tried desperately to stop it. When he saw a priest running over to administer emergency treatment, Ash couldn't help but feel surprised she was still alive. As the priest tended to the woman, Ash walked around, surveying the battlefield. Corpses littered the ground, and Ash realized they were the only two left from their entire team. Yet this was considered fortunate. Out of more than 30 in their squadron, fewer than 10 remained. He stood there in a daze, staring blankly at his hands, which were once again stained with blood. Shifting his gaze from his blood-covered hands, he looked up. Wherever the wind and snow reached, bodies lay buried beneath the sudden heavy snowfall. The snow and blood created a chillingly beautiful yet brutal scene. Is this a real war? Ash murmured to himself, unsure whether he was thankful to be alive or overwhelmed by the horrific sight before him. But regardless, in the face of this war, such thoughts seemed utterly insignificant. In the conflict between the Kingdom of Tad and its neighboring country on the snowfield, the mage troops suffered heavy losses. However, Ash's exceptional performance led to his promotion from a small captain to a large captain. Then came the second, third, fourth, and fifth times. The endless series of small and large conflicts continued intermittently for 5 years. The continuous battles did not kill him. Instead, as a demon, he was tempered by the war, and unexpectedly, he rose to become a general of the Tad Kingdom. Though the war was intermittent, Ash had already gathered 1,000 souls by the second year. He made his first wish, desiring to become the strongest, but it was not granted. He wished for the magical power and combat ability of a demon king, but it wasn't enough. He also desired all the magical knowledge in the world, but again, the souls he had collected were insufficient to perform a miracle of that scale. Frustrated, he realized that the system operated on a principle of equal exchange. Perhaps the price wasn't exactly equal, at least not to him. With only 1,000 souls, his options were limited. So, he continued to gather more souls and eventually made a wish to gain complete knowledge of gravity magic. For the next 4 years, Ash studied the gravity magic system granted by the miracle, refining his skills throughout the long war. After 3 years of sweeping battlefields, he amassed thousands of souls, giving him another chance to perform a miracle. This made him decide not to stay any longer in a kingdom that offered him little in terms of further knowledge. The endless war had lost its meaning to him. Life is so unpredictable. Standing on the snowfield where he had once lost a battle while supporting other fronts, Ash sighed as he looked at the frozen bloodstains beneath his feet in the familiar, yet distant, snowstorm. Kathy, the woman who had survived the battle with him and now served as his adjutant and captain of the Magic Guard, turned her head curiously. She bore a hideous scar on her neck. "What are you talking about, Master Ash?" This time, their main force took a heavy hit. The borrowed troops from neighboring countries are mostly gone. They should behave themselves for a while. I think so too. But, are you ready to keep attacking? No, I'm almost ready to leave. Kathy, it's about time for you to go home too. Master Ash, what are you saying? I'm leaving this place, but before that, I can help you secure a good amount of money. With it, you should be able to buy the big house you've always dreamed of in the capital, where your daughter and mother can live a comfortable life, right? Wait, Master Ash? I don't quite understand. Kathy was stunned by his sudden words, doubting what she had just heard. Ash spoke more to himself than to her. I plan to leave here. This war doesn't belong to you or me. But if you choose to stay, I won't stop you. Won't they ask you to reconsider? I've already submitted my resignation, and I would leave regardless of their response. Now, what about you? He turned to look at the woman who had followed him for 5 years, unsure of what choice she would make. Kathy was not a beneficiary of the war, but a victim of it. Both her father and husband had been forcibly conscripted, and no one knew where they had died. When Kathy faced Ash's question, she remained silent for a long time, then smiled bitterly and shrugged. You're planning to leave? How can I stay here? Yeah. Are you planning to go north? How do you know? Because you're a demon, right? What? You figured it out? I had a slight feeling but couldn't be certain. You still look like the same young man from the beginning. Some people in the kingdom are also suspicious of your true identity. I've heard a bit about that, which is why I have to leave now. Besides, Ash, who didn't care much about it, smiled and looked at Kathy with a strange expression. So, are you going to report me? How could I possibly do that? Kathy smiled bitterly and touched the wound on her neck. If you hadn't knocked that cavalryman away, I wouldn't even have my head attached right now. And now I realize that demons aren't like the rumors say. No, don't think like that. I'm the only exception. If you see a demon, either run or kill them. That's my last piece of advice to you. So, everyone except you is dangerous? Kathy asked, still a bit unsure. Of course, they're ruthless and cruel. Even demons need to be careful around each other. My situation is just special. Is that so? Yes. The conversation fell into an awkward silence. Neither of them was particularly skilled at keeping a conversation going. After a long while, Kathy couldn't help but ask, "You gave me all the money? What about you?" "It's fine. I've kept enough for my journey. So, will we meet again?" Honestly, that sounds like something a heroine in a story would say. Ash replied with a teasing smile, breaking the somber atmosphere. "But I like younger girls, you know? Wives and aunts are a little... If it's okay, can you ask your daughter to say that instead?" Kathy couldn't help but laugh, shaking her head. "You've misunderstood. I just meant that, if there's ever a chance, I'd like to introduce my daughter and my mother to you. They've always wanted to thank you personally for looking after me. Let's not. The lifespan of humans and demons is quite different. There's no benefit in getting to know one more human. But if demons are as dangerous as you say, wouldn't you be lonely? I'm used to it. Aren't all demons like this? But you're not an ordinary demon, right?" "That's true, but I'll get used to it." He smiled, but there was a trace of melancholy in his expression. He didn't say anything more, and Kathy, sensing his mood, lowered her eyes with a sense of regret. The silence between them lingered for a moment longer. Neither knew what else to say, and the weight of parting hung heavily in the air. That night, the two drank heavily together, and the next day, with Ash's help, Kathy was officially discharged from the army. On the same day, Ash parted ways with her on the snowy plain. As Kathy stood there, watching the familiar figure gradually fade into the distance, she couldn't help but sigh, murmuring to herself, "Master Ash, you're so pitiful." "Pitiful? Me? Why? Because I'm an outsider." The familiar voice echoed in her mind, leaving her slightly puzzled. But he didn't dwell on it. Ash quietly walked away, and once he was out of Kathy's sight, he commanded the system to recreate the goddess miracle, transporting him back to the world 500 years ago. On the vast, snow-covered plains, a figure suddenly appeared, slowly falling from midair into the snow. "What the hell? I'm still in this place? But I've heard that Siri, the magician closest to the goddess, is somewhere in the south. Although that's a bit suspicious. Well, it looks like I'll have to spend some time finding her." Ash, looking a bit troubled, pulled out a map full of markings. Although there were too many uncertainties, for now, he could only search one place at a time. Fortunately, as a demon, he had all the time he needed. The world 500 years ago wasn't very different from the present. At least, from Ash's perspective, technological progress during this time was minimal. Magic, in particular, was extremely underdeveloped, and it was clear that humans had not yet widely learned its secrets. So, as he continued searching for Siri, he practiced magic, and after 6 months, deep within the abandoned ruins, constructed from towering stones that had weathered the ages yet still stood strong, a faint beam of light cut through the dust of time, illuminating a distant corner. There, stacked high in endless layers, were mountains of books, taller than a person, and at the far end of this ocean of knowledge, he finally found his long-sought goal. On a massive stone throne, resembling that of a king, sat an elf woman with long golden hair and a surprisingly petite figure. She lounged in the chair in a rather indecent posture, one hand resting on her chin as she gazed at Ash, who was slowly descending the stairs with great interest. "You must be Siri, the magician closest to the goddess on this continent," Ash said. Siri grinned, her eyes full of amusement as she looked him over. "You're certainly interesting. This is the first time I've seen a demon like you. Even her playful smile grew wider. You know who I am, yet you dare stand before me? Are you here to challenge me? No, Ash replied calmly. I'm here to become your disciple. Ha! How ridiculous. You want to become my disciple? Ciri laughed, leaning forward. Even though I'm an elf, I'm still considered human in the broad sense. I'm completely irreconcilable with demons. How dare you ask me to be your mentor? Is your head screwed on right? Wait, you don't even have horns. There must be something wrong with you. We are entirely different races, hostile to one another. What you said makes sense, but I still think I'm normal. Besides, at least I know very well that you don't really want world peace, right? Oh, his confident words made Ciri narrow her eyes. If you wanted it, you could have made it happen a long time ago. You speak as if you know me well. I've done some research. I can see you've killed plenty of people. So why should I teach you magic? I've thought about that, actually. Aren't you afraid I'll kill you? We have to try first, don't we? Very good. I like it. After a long silence, Ciri suddenly laughed and clapped her legs in delight. Let's see what kind of demon I can create by teaching you. Even though I expected something like this, isn't it still a bit strange? Ash asked, bewildered by her reasoning. It's interesting. Isn't that enough? Just tell me what magic you want. Anything at all. Anything? Yes, that immortal magic. How could such magic exist? Ash blurted out. Ciri rolled her eyes and retorted, if it did, would humans still die? That's true. Ash closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the biggest issue he faced on the battlefield. His body wasn't strong enough as a magician. Is there any magic that can make my body as strong as a warrior's? In the age of mythology, there really was magic like that. Really? Yes, it allows magicians to freely convert magic power to achieve the strength of warriors at the same level. It's a very useful type of magic and can deliver unexpected results in critical moments. But, I can't do it. After a pause, she spread her hands dramatically, making Ash nearly want to hit her. Wait, don't you know everything? I've mastered almost all human magic, but not all of it. Moreover, this magic wasn't created by humans. It was invented by a great demon. I've studied it for thousands of years, but still haven't succeeded. However, I can give you all of my research through transfer magic. Transfer magic was a process that allowed someone to directly pass on knowledge to another person at the cost of losing it themselves. Even if the magic was incomplete, Ciri could still transfer it. Ash wanted to complain, but since it was the magic of the Great Demon Clan, he couldn't say much. After all, the unique magic mastered by any major demon clan wasn't something humans could easily learn. The magic of demons was fundamentally different from the magic of other races. Humans, including elves, could only attempt to imitate the spellcasting effects of demons. But the spellcasting processes were completely different. Many aspects of demon magic were altered to the point where they couldn't be reproduced by humans. To put it simply, even if humans could figure out the principles behind demon magic, they lacked the magical organs that demons, and especially great demons, had. Humans would never be able to fully replicate their unique powers. At first, Ash thought that becoming an apprentice might involve some strange tests, but it turned out to be unexpectedly simple. It was surprisingly easy to complete the apprenticeship, and just as easy to gain access to the magic of the great demon tribe from the mythological era. Ash also stayed on to read more of Ciri's books. The reason wasn't anything special. Ciri had the power to end the war, but she was unwilling to do so. In fact, she generally wouldn't act against the demons unless absolutely necessary. According to Ash's research before coming here, the elves' sense of racial identity was quite weak. They seemed to prefer maintaining a state of war over achieving world peace. Unless a great disaster occurred, they might choose to stop it, or they might not, depending on the circumstances. It was with this knowledge that Ash dared to venture here. and only because Siri found him interesting did she accept him as her disciple. Ash, since you're now my disciple and I've taken on a new apprentice, you should hurry and prepare a feast to celebrate. Siri, who had always sought to escape the kitchen, waved her hand and summoned her new apprentice without hesitation. But Ash, still engrossed in her book collection, looked up and stared at her without moving. This immediately displeased her, and she asked, "Didn't you hear what I said?" "No, I heard. I was just wondering. Are you serious, Siri? What do you mean? I teach you magic, but you won't even cook for me?" "It's not that I don't want to. It's just that I don't know how. Of course, if you want to try demon cuisine, I wouldn't mind showing off my skills." "Demon cuisine? We eat it raw. But can your stomach handle it?" "If you can, I don't mind making some for you." Ash said this earnestly, though he didn't really know much about it himself. Then he stood up silently, intending to prepare some pork sashimi for her. Siri's face wrinkled at the thought of raw meat. Forget it. I'll do it myself. By the way, I'm a little different. I prefer cooked meat." "Who asked you? Get lost. Go eat your demon specialties on your own." "No need. I can also have barbecue. Are you too lazy to do it? Or are you lying to me? Trust me. I'm thinking about your health." Although Siri really wanted to make Ash do some work, unfortunately, whenever she tried to get him to cook, the food was terrible. She even tried to teach him, but 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. "Siri, add some chili. Trust me, this meat tastes better with a bit of spice." "No, I don't eat spicy food." Siri flipped the spoon and scolded without turning her head. "Also, why are you giving orders when I'm the one teaching you? Stop talking like that. Why should we worry about the master-disciple dynamic so much?" Ash casually ignored Siri's displeasure and muttered, "Use less salt. Your cooking's too salty. A mere demon, yet you're quite picky. I'm worried you're getting old. Eating too much spicy food can cause high blood pressure. I've lived for thousands of years, eating like this the whole time, and I've been just fine. But you've only been here for 3 years, and my blood pressure has already risen a lot. How did teaching him magic turn into improving my own cooking skills? And then, somehow, I ended up responsible for the catering." Although she was often bored and many of Ash's ideas were admittedly good, the inexplicable sense of emptiness still made Siri quite unhappy. She turned around and glared fiercely at Ash. Being well versed in the habits of his petite elf teacher by now, Ash raised his hands instinctively, backed away with a smile, and silently left, doing his best to avoid getting smacked by his angry mentor. The days of eating and drinking for free have their limits, after all. Even though elves have immense patience and their perception of time is different from that of humans. By the 3rd year, Siri could no longer tolerate it and decided to force him to cook. She even vowed to teach him to be a good cook so she wouldn't have to handle the cooking anymore. "Yes, flip it like this and add more seasoning. Hey, don't think I didn't see that. No chili. If you sneak chili in when I'm not paying attention, I'll stuff it all into your mouth. You're so strict, but isn't it unreasonable to roast a whole lamb without any spice? I'm the master, so if I say no, it's no. Don't talk back." Watching her disciple squat in front of the grill, flipping the meat, Siri raised her leg and lightly kicked him on the butt, slapping away the chili powder he had just picked up. "Tisk. Old people these days are so unreasonable," Ash muttered under his breath, smacking his lips as he broke off a piece of lamb to taste without the chili. However, when he tore off the meat, his hands were burned by the heat. Unable to hold it, he kept switching hands to avoid getting scorched. He instinctively turned around and threw it toward her. Quick, Siri. It's hot. Take it. Huh? Ugh. It's so hot. Siri, caught off guard, reflexively caught the meat, but her expression quickly twisted in pain from the heat. She frantically switched it between her hands and, in a panic, tossed it back at him. By reflex, Ash caught it again, but hastily threw it back. No, don't give it to me. It's burning. It's so hot. Hot. You brat. Do you think I'm not afraid of the heat? After another round of back and forth, Siri finally came to her senses. She switched hands one last time and quickly threw the entire roasted leg of lamb to the ground. Having successfully dealt with the hot meat, Ash wiped the sweat from his forehead. Phew, that was close. My hands almost got blisters. Yes, you're fine, but... Siri's face was full of exasperation as she held her two reddened hands in the air. With a look that could kill, she gritted her teeth and hissed, "My hands are already blistered." Siri's curse-like whisper made Ash glance at his red hands. He averted his gaze, trying to pretend nothing had happened as he awkwardly changed the subject. "Ah, come to think of it, will the roasted lamb still taste good after being frozen? I haven't tried it, so I don't know. But I do know that if you don't give me an explanation today, you'll definitely regret it." After all, she had lived for thousands of years. Siri smiled with no intention of letting the matter drop, forcing Ash to raise his hands in surrender. "Well, actually, I think it was just too hot. Do you think I'm not afraid of being burned? They say older people don't mind pain as much because their hands are thick with calluses." "Ah, what a coincidence. I've also heard that demons are thick-skinned and don't mind a beating." Siri's smile grew even brighter. "How about changing today's class to a magic attack and defense session? I'll attack and you run away." "I refuse. Give me your reasons. Because you'll definitely take revenge." He pointed at Siri as he backed away, hoping to stop her retaliation with persuasion. "And think about it, Siri. Your well-behaved disciple worked hard to cook for you. Shouldn't you feel touched?" "Well-behaved? Haha, that's funny. I don't know how you can say that with a straight face, but I am touched." And as a reward for guessing correctly, Siri's hands were suddenly surrounded by dark flames as she grinned ferociously. The fire of hell! Boom! In an instant, the makeshift barbecue stand outside the ruins was engulfed in flames. Ash took advantage of the chaos to escape, but Siri, still harboring resentment, continued her bombardment. In the blink of an eye, the surrounding forests were completely destroyed. Half a month passed in no time. After finishing the meal that Siri had reluctantly prepared, Ash decided it was time to explore and learn more about the powerful elves of this era. He set his sights on visiting the elven village in a neighboring country that Siri had told him about. "Siri, I'm going on a long trip, so you won't need to make my meals for a while. Am I your mother? I've been wanting to get rid of you. A freeloader who eats and drinks without lifting a finger. In fact, it would be better if..." Siri, sitting on her throne, initially looked displeased but then broke into a wide grin. "If you leave now, don't come back. Don't say that. Once a teacher, always a mother. In my heart, you are..." Whoa! Before he could finish, a powerful gust of wind interrupted him, blowing him out of the hall. Using magic to lighten his body, Ash rolled across the ground. Though covered in dirt, he wasn't hurt. He stood up calmly, dusted himself off, and muttered, "I'm studying hard, and you kick me out like this? Isn't that a bit harsh?" However, deep inside the hall, Siri completely ignored him, leaving him feeling a bit disappointed. With a large bag of ancient magic books borrowed from Siri, Ash left the place, at least temporarily. While searching for the elf village, Ash hadn't yet found any elves, but instead came across someone strangely familiar. But, thinking carefully, he realized there couldn't be many people he knew from 500 years ago. Not that things had changed much 500 years later. The woman's long orange hair covered half of her face, making her appear to be in her early 30s. Ash found this suspicious at first, but he quickly remembered that he had read plenty about this person in his studies. She was none other than the great mage of human magic, Flam. And now, you... Flam's gaze narrowed as she noticed something strange. "Why are you staring at me?" "Ahem, You're Flam, right? I've heard of you. You've heard of me? Flam, who usually kept a low profile, frowned at his words. Her expression became more guarded, and she secretly prepared magic. After all, in this chaotic world, danger was everywhere. Even the most powerful magician could fall prey to a hidden dagger. Don't get me wrong, Ash said quickly. I heard about you from Siri. Master, to be precise, I'm your junior fellow apprentice. Junior brother? Master has accepted a new disciple. Is that strange? Very. Flam didn't hesitate to nod, casting a scrutinizing gaze at Ash. Given Master's personality, it shouldn't be that easy for her to take on a disciple. What exactly did she see in you? Maybe my sincerity and diligence? It may not be polite for me to say this, but Master isn't the type to accept a disciple just because they're sincere and diligent in learning. She's also rather rude, you know. She knocked me out when I left. I just hope she learns to respect her elders and care for the younger ones. Flam said nothing, simply continuing to stare at him in silence. While Ash's appearance seemed ordinary, his aura gave her an unsettling feeling. What she found most disturbing was that his presence distinctly gave off the sensation that he had killed many people. Could it be that she was just overthinking things? Or perhaps it was because it was her first time seeing someone who had taken so many lives that it caused such unease. She wasn't certain. Out of an abundance of caution, Flam chose not to say anything more. She quietly distanced herself from Ash, planning to confirm everything with Siri once she returned. Ash watched her go, and only after Flam disappeared from his view did the smile vanish from his face. He let out a sigh of relief, muttering to himself, "The stealth technique Siri taught me really works. If I had run into her earlier, I definitely would have been exposed." Although they hadn't fought, Ash could tell from her aura that Flam was undoubtedly the strongest human he had ever encountered, even if she had been suppressing her full strength. But since she had already chosen to avoid him, he saw no point in worrying. With a light heart, he continued on his way, following the map that Siri had given him before. As he walked, he suddenly realized something. Siri had given him this map and told him the location of the elf village. Maybe to get him out of the way? Could it be that she was trying to stop him from freeloading any longer? After a long journey, Ash finally located the legendary elf village using the map. But isn't this a little too far from what I imagined? Deep within the remote, primeval forest lay the hidden elf village, seemingly forgotten by time. It rested quietly in an empty, secluded area, surrounded by ancient, towering trees. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting mottled shadows across the village, shrouding the land in a mysterious, slightly melancholic veil. The elves' stone houses were scattered across the open space. Though not exactly elegant, their rustic charm was, well, non-existent. There wasn't even a hint of aesthetic appeal, just simple, weathered buildings. The roofs were covered in moss and vines, showing the wear and tear of time, as if telling the story of wild, unchecked growth over the years. The doors and windows were small, a bit dilapidated, and no one seemed to have bothered to repair them. The scattered elves were simply dressed, almost resembling refugees. If not for the fact that their clothes were relatively neat, they could have easily been mistaken for ordinary medieval villagers. They moved about unenthusiastically, tending to their tasks without any real energy. No children or elders were in sight, at least none that Ash could distinguish. The peculiar lowly elf Siri had already shattered Ash's idealized image of elves with her quirky personality, but this village took it to a whole new level. Elves in stories were always portrayed as beautiful, elegant beings, often possessing a mystical aura. But in reality, why is there such a massive gap between stories and reality? This village is shabby and lacks any sense of beauty. These guys are crushing all my dreams. While grumbling about his shattered fantasy, Ash scanned the area and noticed one elf in the crowd who stood out, seemingly the strongest among them. The elf had a graceful figure, with smooth silver hair flowing down to her waist like a waterfall. It shimmered with a soft, mysterious glow, reminiscent of moonlight. Her delicate, elongated ears exuded an air of spirituality and elegance, and her emerald eyes were deep and luminous, captivating anyone who looked into them. Although she stood only about 1.5 meters tall, she had an undeniable petite charm. Every movement radiated grace and cuteness, evoking an almost instinctual desire to protect her. Well, actually, that was just Ash's imagination, the result of beautifying the elves he had read about in stories. In reality, although the elf did have silver hair down to her waist, long ears, and emerald eyes, she was quite small and had a rather chestnut-shaped body. The only advantage is probably that she looks quite cute. But she is a loli, and he is not a Lolita complex, so it is indeed different from what he expected. While he was secretly depressed, the elf seemed to have noticed his gaze, walked over and frowned. "Who are you? Why are you looking at me?" and sighing. "Just a passerby." While speaking, he couldn't help but sigh again. "I just thought of something sad. Please don't mind it. After all, I'm a good person." "Yeah, are you really a good guy? Your aura is a little strange and murderous, obviously." The girl pointed a finger at his face and asked bluntly, "Are you actually a fugitive? Do I look like that kind of person?" "I don't know, maybe." "Actually, I am the general of the kingdom." "Then why come here?" "Actually, I defected." "Defected?" The elf girl widened her eyes in surprise. "He is indeed a fugitive? But why?" "Because I want to learn magic." "Want to learn magic? You look pretty strong among humans, right? Although I haven't seen many humans. You look very strong. Can you teach me magic?" Although the opponent was obviously not as strong as the two he had met before, she was still a long-lived elf and should have her own unique magic. Ash took out 2 gold coins from his body while speaking. "This a payment? Is it enough?" The girl glanced at the money in his hand and shook her head slowly. "No payment is needed here. That's troublesome. But in exchange, you can exchange it with your prey." "Ah, I'm good at hunting." He smiled and then extended his hand to the girl in front of him. "My name is Ash. What's yours?" "Frieren." "Then please give me your guidance from now on, Miss Frieren." Frieren nodded coldly and walked toward a stone house without intending to say anything more to him. Although he felt a little regretful, he didn't care too much. He was just a little worried about what to do next. But Frieren stopped and looked back. "What are you doing standing there?" I was wondering what I should do at this time." "Come over." "Edna's house has been empty for a while. She probably won't come back before you die, so I can lend it to you temporarily." Frieren raised her hand and pointed to a building covered with vines. "You're exaggerating, but how long is a while? About 30 years? It's a long while." It was like she had been out for 10 days or half a month, which made Ash smack his lips. However, he still looked around and couldn't help but ask, "Speaking of which, you should be very free. Why don't you repair these residences? They'll just break after a while. It's too much trouble. As long as they don't leak in the rain, it will be fine." "How long is a while?" Never mind. I can probably guess." He held his forehead with one hand and tried to adjust his thoughts. Even though he was already an immortal, he couldn't adapt to the elves' unique view of time for a while. But no matter what, he temporarily lived in this elf village, which he didn't know whether it could be considered hospitable or not. Since elves in this world are considered humans in a broad sense, and sometimes they call themselves humans, they do not have any xenophobic ideas towards humans. The long lifespan and the study of magic made this village different from the human village he first encountered. It seemed unexpectedly wealthy. Or maybe not, perhaps they just simply had enough to eat. But being in this deep mountain, it's impossible to have any delicious food. But I didn't expect that the elves' barbecue skills to be so good. After all, I'm free. Frieren, who looked unmotivated, gave an answer without thinking. The answer made sense, but it made him want to complain. The look of wanting to say something but not being able to made Frieren raise her eyebrows subconsciously. What? It's okay. I just thought it would be great if I could adapt to this place as soon as possible. There's no point in adapting. You'll leave soon. Is that so? Everyone who comes here is like this. I heard that no one lives longer than 100 years. That means he's dead. Ah, it seems so? Frieren sighed in a tone that was a little lacking in emotion, staring at the flames in front of her. Human lifespans are really short. You die of old age before you get familiar with the world. I'm not saying, how slow are you? What does that mean? I'm slow to warm up. Never mind. Ash felt that human slowness was a little different from hers. So he simply ended this meaningless topic and asked, "Can I ask you something? When are you going to teach me magic?" Take a short break. Let me confirm first. How long is your short break? 30 years. Frieren didn't think much about it and gave a time that seemed about right. With 30 years, you will be able to adapt to this village and start studying properly. Right? Are you serious? He asked, dumbfoundedly, while Frieren looked puzzled. Why would I lie? What should I do? I suddenly want to hit someone. Huh? Do you have a tendency to violence? Frieren subconsciously moved away from him and even regretted arranging a place for him to stay. This obviously defensive look made him put one hand on his forehead and try to suppress the boiling emotions in his heart, working hard not to hit her on the forehead. That's not it. The weird thing is you. Normally speaking, I can learn sea language from the very beginning to the very end in 30 years. What language is that? Sounds weird. He couldn't explain how the sea language worked. In short, he was speechless for a moment. He just covered his face and began to worry about the next communication and life living in this village. Although he was also an immortal for a while, he was still unable to get used to the concept of time, which was so different from his past. But since he was already here, he was not willing to just leave like that. So he forced himself to make an agreement during the meal to start learning magic tomorrow. The next day, the agreed time arrived. He was going to ask Frieren to teach him magic, but when no one showed up, he went straight to Frieren's hut. And when he opened the door, he saw, what is this? The lower half of the silver-haired elf's body remained on the bed, but the upper half had fallen out of the bed, with the side of her face pressed against the ground. She was really using her face to support half of her body, and just looking at it made him feel a little pain in his face. After being dumbfounded for a moment, he squatted beside Frieren and poked her face with his hand. Hurry up and wake up, Frieren. The sun has already risen. Hello, are you dead? Frieren didn't respond at all, which gave him a headache, and he flicked her long ears with his fingers. However, still no response. You don't want to wake up even after this? Then there's nothing I can do. After thinking for a moment, Ash raised his hand, grabbed her ankle and lifted her up. This elf, whose age is unknown and whose body shape is similar to that of a loli, was lifted upside down. Under the influence of gravity, the pure white skirt flipped over, revealing the girl's simple white panties. I used to wonder why there's underwear in this era. Now I'm wondering why this elf hasn't reacted to her underwear being exposed. Are all elves like this? Looking at the plain fabric without any embellishment, and not sensing any fragrance, only made his headache worse. The elf didn't make any noise, no matter how much he shook her, which made him question if there was something wrong with the elf population. However, just as the words left his mouth, a voice came from the side. No, it's just that Frieren likes to sleep in. Is she really this naive? It's the first time I've seen someone sleep this deeply. He turned his head and saw an elf girl, dressed simply but wearing a dark cloak, who looked more mature than Frieren, standing at the door. Is this your first time meeting someone? Newcomer? The girl observed him curiously. I guess so. My name's Ash. What's yours? Millie Ald. Really? That name's a bit too long. Can I just call you Millie? It's not that long, but your name's a bit short. By the way, do you know magic? Huh? Isn't this conversation moving a bit too fast? I think it's fine. But before we talk about that, Millie tilted her head, looking at Frieren, who was still hanging upside down in her hand, and asked, "Shouldn't we put Frieren down first?" Her face is turning red. It's all red. Normally, that should mean she's awake, right? Yes, I'm awake, but I don't want to get up. Why not? Your underwear's showing. As he spoke, he continued to shake the girl upside down in his hands, as if shaking a rabbit he had casually picked up. Millie pointed out the problem expressionlessly. She's never left here, so she's a bit slow with things like that. Besides, to us, you're no different from a 3-year-old child. What a hassle. What a strange person. Indeed, she might be a bit strange for a human. Millie glanced at Frieren hanging in his hand, but quickly looked back at his face. But for a human, your behavior is also a bit odd, isn't it? By the way, do you know magic? You're back to that again? Because it's important. You're really something. Can you please stay on topic? Well, either way, let's put her down first, shall we? In the end, after a bit of a tug-of-war with Millie, Ash threw Frieren back onto the bed, deciding not to pay attention to the person who refused to get up even though her skirt was exposed. After giving up on waking Frieren, Ash followed Millie out of her room, no, her wine cellar, or rather, her residence. Just looking at the rows upon rows of wine barrels packed into the stone house made his scalp tingle. Why is there so much alcohol here? Hehe. Millie didn't answer his question, but instead pulled out a bottle of wine, proudly introducing it. Did you know? This is Emperor's wine. No idea. The Emperor's wine is a wine dedicated to the Emperor of the vast empire that ruled most of the continent. Millie continued, smiling slyly as she handed him the bottle. This is the finest nectar. Don't you want to taste it? Taste it? Then I'll let you go first. He opened the bottle cap with some doubt, but suddenly, he grabbed the elf by the chin and poured the wine into her mouth as if refueling a machine. The next moment, the elf girl choked, spitting out a mouthful of wine. Instantly, the room was filled with the overwhelming stench of cheap alcohol. Just from the smell alone, one could question the quality of the wine. Millie, now with wine all over her face, glared at him angrily. You made me drink something so awful again. Have you already tasted Emperor's wine before? My sister usually has a similar look on her face when she's up to no good, though he couldn't quite understand why other demons had such emotionless faces while Aura was so expressive. Was it really thanks to him? He still hadn't figured that out, and Millie, looking annoyed, muttered, "Someone beat me to it? So? It really does taste awful, doesn't it? Forget the taste. This is precious. It's really Emperor's wine," Millie emphasized, clearly upset. This made him hesitate for a moment, still looking warily at the wine in his hand. When you put it that way, I'm a little curious. Hurry and try it. Is anyone going to die? You just made me drink some. Do I look dead? That's true. Nodding slightly, he threw caution to the wind and drank it in one go. There was no soft flavor, no smoothness. The harsh, sour, and pungent taste exploded in his mouth and throat. The wine's acidity was way too high, and its sharpness made him recoil. Just drinking it filled him with distaste, and he couldn't help but frown. It's horrible. Yeah, I thought so too. Before I came to this village, I even carved a stone tablet praising the taste of Emperor's wine. Your character is worse than this wine. Thanks for the compliment, but you don't seem much better off. Millie nodded nonchalantly, giving an amused smile. I think we'll get along well. I just want to learn magic. It's fine. We have plenty of time. Don't use Elf's time on me. All right, then we'll officially start in a few years. No more waiting. Today. Now. Right this second. He couldn't take the elf's relaxed sense of time anymore. Frustrated, he grabbed Millie and shook her until she finally gave in. But even though she agreed, Millie was still moving so slowly that it made Ash anxious. After constant urging, Millie reluctantly began to make preparations. That is, after eating breakfast, she mentally prepared herself to teach. However, the magic she eventually decided to teach him was to help wheat grow better. This kind of magic was completely useless to him, no matter how he looked at it. Frustrated, Ash chased after Millie, who had somehow escaped happily. He was determined to tie her up and make her teach him something more meaningful. But before he could catch Millie, around noon, he spotted Frieren emerging from her room, stretching lazily in the sunlight. "That lazy look is like an old lady," he muttered without thinking, causing Frieren to sharply turn her head toward him. Her expression was clearly one of displeasure, as if his comment had struck a nerve. But he chose to ignore her and simply said, "What's the matter? Shouldn't young people be going to bed early and waking up early? These weren't modern-day kids staying up all night playing with their phones or computers. Why would medieval villagers, with nothing better to do, be so lazy?" Ash was genuinely puzzled. Frieren, with a stern face, retorted grumpily, "We have all the time in the world. What's the rush? All right." He initially wanted to give her a piece of his mind, but remembering that he still needed her help, he decided to hold his tongue. This left Frieren, who had been ready for a confrontation and prepared to scold him for lifting her up earlier, feeling like her efforts had been wasted. She didn't get the chance to say anything further. And so, Ash's learning in the elf village continued uneventfully in this peculiar atmosphere. Life in the elf village could be described as the very definition of monotony. It was dull and uneventful. Every elf seemed to exude a sense of laziness and lack of drive, which made Ash feel even less motivated than when he was with Millie. At least Ciri, despite being idle, still had the urge to do something. Although, thanks to her magic, her clothes never actually got moldy. In contrast, "It's already evening. Aren't you going to rest yet?" Ash stood in Frieren's room, having entered without hesitation. He looked at her, already lying under her quilt with a blank expression on her face, clearly regretting agreeing to teach him magic in the first place. Compared to Frieren and the other elves in the village, Ash's boundless enthusiasm made Frieren begin to wonder if most humans died before reaching the age of 100 due to sheer overwork. Yet now, despite recognizing the problem, Ash gave her no chance to regret teaching him. She wasn't the only one grumbling, though. Ash also wore a dark expression. "It's just barely getting dark, and you're telling me you want to rest? Let's go find Millie. She's probably still drinking tonight. She should have time," Frieren suggested. "No, absolutely not." He immediately shot down the idea, causing Frieren to throw off the quilt and glare at him in annoyance. "Why? Hasn't she traveled abroad before? She must know a lot of magic, right?" "Yes, but for some reason, she's particularly obsessed with growing wheat. She even has magic that makes it sprout faster after planting. She insisted I learn that spell before teaching me anything else. She wouldn't budge, even after I drank her treasured wine. That's because wheat can be used to make wine. She probably fixates on it for that reason. By the way, you're ruthless." Frieren couldn't help but admire him, even if she was dumbfounded. "I remember hearing it was wine from 600 years ago. She cherished it deeply, didn't she? And you just drank it without a second thought. Even so, it tasted awful. It's a miracle she didn't fight you over it. Why are you still complaining about the taste? Just be quiet. For now, I'll teach you the secret of our elven longevity." As she spoke, Frieren lay back down and pulled the quilt over herself again, turning her back on him. "Just relax a bit. If you keep this up, you won't live for hundreds of years. Normal humans can't live that long," Ash muttered as he tugged at her blanket, trying to uncover it. But Frieren clung to the quilt stubbornly, refusing to let go. "That's not necessarily true. Humans are always in such a hurry, and that's why they rarely live past 100. What nonsense. You're just wasting your life like this. How will you know your limits if you never try?" Frieren retorted, as if she sincerely hoped he'd experiment with his life for 100 years. The thought made Ash break into a nervous sweat. Don't you think it's a bit tragic to gamble with your life? But isn't it more pitiful to live in ignorance? I don't think so. It's just 100 years. What's the big deal? We're getting off topic. Stop wasting your life already. You should let go of this argument too, right? That night, Ash and Frieren argued and wrestled over the blanket, and the final result was, the next day, Frieren still hadn't woken up by noon, and at some point, she had rolled onto the floor, tangled up in the quilt. Meanwhile, Ash had taken over her bed, resting his head on her pillow, sleeping soundly, though without any covers. Millie, curious about why the village was so quiet that day, came over to investigate. But when she opened the door and saw the scene before her, Ash sleeping soundly in Frieren's bed while Frieren lay tangled in the blanket on the floor, her expression turned odd. However, sticking to her philosophy of avoiding unnecessary trouble, Millie, not wanting to get involved in whatever chaotic relationship was brewing between the two, quietly closed the door as if nothing had happened. Although life in the village was typically dull, there were occasional small disruptions. At least for the elves, Ash had managed to stir up quite a bit of commotion in their previously peaceful existence. Almost every elf, when they had the time, would be pulled into discussions about magic by him. Occasionally, Ash could be found lying under a tree in the village, quietly reading, studying, and practicing the magic he had learned from Ciri. After their daily magic training, Millie and Frieren often sat nearby, leisurely observing the human who had been in the village for nearly 2 years without them even noticing the passage of time. Millie, look at him, Frieren remarked. He's so busy every day. Feels like he won't make it past 100 years. What are you talking about, Frieren? Humans usually die in the blink of an eye, don't they? Seeing such a busy human, does it make lazy, dazed Millie feel anything at all? Are you touched? Millie, wine glass still in hand, lowered her head to think for a moment. Then she turned to her friend. Frieren has been calling me Millie a lot lately. You used to call me Millie Ald, didn't you? Is that so? Frieren's surprised expression slipped out unconsciously. Millie smiled and nodded, her gaze now fixed on Ash with renewed interest. He's quite an interesting human. They're really rare. Don't take it too seriously. Humans can die so easily. That's true. Millie nodded in agreement and didn't dwell on Ash's situation any longer. Instead, she continued sipping her wine, chatting with Frieren as usual. But that night, while everyone else in the village was sound asleep, Ash remained in the stone house, tirelessly practicing magic without pause. As dark clouds slowly covered the moon, a deep, quiet darkness descended upon the once peaceful elf village. For some unknown reason, the night seemed unnaturally still. Even the usual sounds of birds and animals had vanished, leaving a silence so profound it was almost eerie. In the stillness, the candlelight flickered faintly, casting long shadows that made the atmosphere feel unusually tense and cold. And amid this dead quiet, the lush forest at the edge of the village became the stage for something strange. Mottled moonlight filtered through the treetops, illuminating a group of mysterious figures draped in long robes. They moved like specters in the night, their bodies concealed beneath robes of various colors. Their heads were clearly not human, most of them adorned with horns, much like the demons of legend.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.